Decisive: How to Make Better Choices in Life and Work by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. Picture this. Shannon owns a small consulting firm, and she's got this IT director named Clive. Here's the thing about Clive. He's not terrible at his job. Actually, he's pretty smart and great at solving problems on the fly. But that's where the good news ends. He does the bare minimum, shows zero initiative, and honestly, he can be downright nasty in meetings. His words cut deep. The problem is, losing him would hurt, at least in the short run. The guy knows their client database like the back of his hand, so Shannon's stuck in this frustrating limbo. Fire him? Keep him? What should she do? Now here's where it gets interesting. In the few seconds it took me to describe Shannon's dilemma, your brain probably already started cooking up an answer, right? Maybe you thought, oh, definitely fire him, or perhaps, give the guy one more shot. It's wild how quickly this happens. Daniel Kahneman, the brilliant psychologist who actually won a Nobel Prize for studying how we make decisions, pointed out something fascinating. A remarkable aspect of your mental life is that you are rarely stumped. Our minds are opinion-generating machines, churning out gut reactions almost instantly. But here's where we run into trouble. When we think about Clive, we're only working with what's right in front of us. The details I just handed you. Kahneman called this the spotlight effect. We see what's lit up perfectly, but everything lurking just outside that beam, we forget it exists. Our brains instantly jump to fire him or keep him. We don't naturally ask the bigger questions. Could his role be redesigned to play to his strengths? Would a mentor turn things around? What do his colleagues actually think? Is Shannon even a good manager herself? When we start moving that spotlight around, suddenly the whole picture shifts dramatically. Good decisions require us to move that light, but our brains love to forget. There's a whole world beyond that narrow circle. And honestly, looking at humanity's track record with big decisions, we're not exactly crushing it. People regret their career choices. Executives get hired and fired in the blink of an eye. Teachers leave the profession before they've barely started. Those big corporate mergers that make headlines, over 80% fail to create any real value. And in our personal lives, saving for retirement, managing relationships, taking time to actually enjoy life, we constantly fall short. Our brains, it turns out, are pretty flawed instruments when it comes to making choices. So what's the solution? Should we just trust our gut? Well, that same gut tells us that a cheesecake packing the calorie punch of 3 double cheeseburgers plus a bag of Skittles sounds absolutely perfect after dinner. Our gut led Liz Taylor and Richard Burton to remarry each other despite overwhelming evidence it was doomed. And guess what? It didn't last. Maybe careful analysis is the answer? Actually, research shows that even rigorous analysis is useless if your decision-making process is broken. One study found that the process mattered more than the analysis itself by a factor of 6. This brings us to Chip Heath and Dan Heath. You might know these guys from their massive bestsellers, Made to Stick and Switch. They're absolute masters at understanding why we behave the way we do, and, more importantly, how we can do better. In Decisive, they tackle perhaps the most crucial skill of all, making better choices. This isn't just another book describing our mental blind spots. It's a practical guide, a real roadmap, offering a clear, memorable process designed to counteract the hidden forces sabotaging our decisions. By the end of our journey today, you'll understand the 4 great villains of decision-making, and more importantly, you'll have a powerful 4-step framework. The authors call it WRAP, to help you fight back and make choices you can actually feel confident about. Choices that lead to a genuinely better life and better work. So why is making good choices so ridiculously hard? We rely on that mental spotlight, focusing intently on whatever information lands right in front of us. But what's caught in that spotlight is often misleading or painfully incomplete. The Heath brothers argue that our decision-making consistently gets sabotaged by 4 specific villains. If we can learn to spot them, we can learn to fight them. Villain 1, narrow framing. The first villain is what they call narrow framing. This is our tendency to define choices way too narrowly, usually boiling everything down to a simple whether or not question. Think back to Shannon. Should I fire Clive or not? Or picture teenagers deciding, should I go to the party or not? They only see one option under the spotlight, completely ignoring countless others waiting in the wings. Here's the shocking part. It's not just teenagers doing this. Researcher Paul Nutt spent decades studying organizational decisions, big ones made by companies like GE and NASA. His findings were jaw-dropping. Only 29% of the teams he studied even considered more than one alternative. That's actually worse than the teenagers in another study. Most organizations get stuck in this whether or not trap, and the consequences are real. Nutt found that these single-option decisions failed over half the time in the long run, compared to only about a third for decisions with multiple alternatives. Why does this happen? Because when we only consider one option, all our energy goes into asking, how can I make this work, instead of the much more important question, is there a better way? So the first step in the RAP process is to widen your options. How do we break free from this narrow frame? One simple trick is to become allergic to whether or not decisions. When you hear yourself or someone else framing a choice that way, let an alarm bell ring in your head. Push yourself. What else could I do? Think about the opportunity cost, what you're actually giving up when you make a choice. Shane Frederick, a decision scientist, was agonizing between a $1,000 stereo and a $700 one. A salesman broke his deadlock by asking, would you rather have the Pioneer or the Sony plus $300 worth of albums? Suddenly, the choice became crystal clear. He hadn't even considered what else that $300 could buy. Research shows that simply reminding people, keep the $14.99 for other purchases, dramatically changes whether they buy an impulse item like a video. Ask yourself, what else could I do with this same time and money? Another powerful technique is the vanishing options test. Imagine your current options just disappear. What else could you do? Margaret Sanders, a career services director, was stuck deciding whether or not to fire her shy administrative assistant, Anna. When asked what she'd do if firing Anna wasn't an option, and she couldn't rely on Anna for those front-door social tasks, Sanders instantly generated a new idea. Move Anna to purely administrative work and hire cheap work-study students for the front desk. Necessity truly is the mother of invention. When our options vanish, our spotlight is forced to move. Sometimes widening options means multi-tracking, considering several options simultaneously. Think of Lexicon, the firm that named BlackBerry and Swiffer. When naming Colgate's mini toothbrush, which eventually became the Wisp, they didn't just brainstorm names for small brush. They had multiple teams working in parallel. One team explored metaphors for lightness. Another team, kept completely blind to the actual product, explored ideas for Olay-branded oral care, tapping into beauty concepts. This multi-tracking prevents you from locking in too early and often sparks unexpected connections. It's actually how Strawberry led them to BlackBerry. An excursion team looking for things that bring joy and slow us down stumbled upon it. Multi-tracking isn't just about creativity. It actually makes us smarter. Studies of graphic designers found that those who worked on 3 ad designs simultaneously produced better results and learned more from feedback than those who worked on one design at a time. Why? Comparing options helps you understand the real shape of the problem. It also keeps egos in check. If you have multiple ideas floating around, you're less defensive about criticism of any single one. And counterintuitively, researcher Kathleen Eisenhardt found that executives who consider more options actually make faster decisions, partly because comparing options builds confidence and undercuts office politics. But how many options should you consider? Don't we risk choice overload, like staring at 24 kinds of jam and being unable to pick one? The authors argue that the bigger danger is having only one option. Adding just 1 or 2 more distinct alternatives dramatically improves decision quality, as shown in a study of a German tech firm, where decisions with multiple options were 6 times more likely to be rated, quote, very good. Just beware of what they call sham options. like the bureaucratic trick Henry Kissinger described, offering choices like nuclear war, the status quo, or surrender. Real options should have real advocates. And what if you're truly stuck, unable to generate options? Find someone who's solved your problem. This is the wisdom of Sam Walton, founder of Walmart, who constantly scouted competitors like Ben Franklin stores, where he found the idea for centralized checkout, and Kmart. He famously said, "Most everything I've done I've copied from someone else." You can look outside your organization, like Walton did with benchmarking and best practices. But don't forget to look inside. Kaiser Permanente dramatically reduced sepsis deaths by finding and scaling solutions developed by Dr. Diane Craig's team at one of their own hospitals, an internal bright spot. What successes have you had that you could replicate? To make this proactive, create what they call playlists. Lists of questions or principles drawn from past successes, whether internal or external. Advertising consultants Hughes and Johnson use a playlist of questions like, "What iconography is useful?" and "What is the enemy?" to generate dozens of ideas quickly, like the brilliant banana peel trail campaign for Diana's Bananas. A checklist prevents errors. A playlist stimulates ideas. If you're still stuck, ladder up using analogies. Scientists constantly use analogies, comparing a new virus to a known one, or one experiment to another. Lower rungs on the ladder offer close analogies, with low risk and low novelty. Higher rungs offer more distant ones, with higher risk but higher novelty. Think of a junior high principal trying to speed up the lunch line. He could look at other schools. That's close. Then checkout processes anywhere. That's regional. Then crowd flow experts like Disney. That's distant. Then maybe even plumbers for resource flow. That's very distant. Possibly absurd. Fiona Fairhurst designed Speedo's revolutionary fast-skin swimsuit by laddering way up. She didn't just look at other swimsuits. She looked at anything that moves fast in water, leading her to sharks and torpedoes. So to fight narrow framing, widen your options, look for the opportunity cost, run the vanishing options test, try multi-tracking, and find those who've solved your problem by looking outside, inside, and in the distance. Villain 2, the confirmation bias. Okay, so you've widened your options, now you need to evaluate them. Here comes the second villain, the confirmation bias. This is our deeply ingrained habit of seeking out information that supports what we already believe and conveniently ignoring information that contradicts us. Smokers in the 60s were way more interested in articles saying smoking didn't cause cancer. Political partisans seek out news that confirms their views. We think we want truth, but often we're just hunting for reassurance. Remember those tone-deaf singers on reality TV who look genuinely shocked by negative feedback? They've spent their entire lives spotlighting praise from friends and family while completely ignoring anything else. The confirmation bias is especially insidious because it feels like we're being rational. We're collecting data after all. But as researcher Dan Lavallo warns, we don't realize we're, quote, cooking the books. This bias gets strongest when emotions are involved, when we really want to believe something, or when we've already invested tons of time in an idea. Even CEOs aren't immune. Studies show that the more media praise a CEO gets, the more likely they are to overpay for acquisitions, blinded by their own inflated self-image. How do we fight this pervasive bias? The second step of RAP, reality test your assumptions. First, actively consider the opposite. Alfred Sloan, the legendary GM leader, famously postponed a decision when everyone agreed too quickly, asking them to return next time with reasons for disagreement. We need to actually invite dissent. The Catholic Church used a, quote, devil's advocate for centuries when deciding on sainthood. Tellingly, since that office was eliminated, saints have been canonized way faster. In your own life, do you ever seek out people you know will disagree with you? It's uncomfortable as hell, but way better than walking blindly into a bad choice. But simple dissent can turn into unproductive arguments pretty fast. Roger Martin, a business strategist, offers a brilliant technique. When consulting for Inmet Mining, facing a tense debate about closing a mine, He stopped the arguments and asked everyone, what would have to be true for this option to be the right answer? Suddenly, adversaries became collaborators, exploring the conditions under which each option could actually work. This shifts the frame from defending your position to exploring real possibilities. It lets people disagree without being disagreeable. Second, learn to ask disconfirming questions. We think we're gathering information, but often we're just fishing for support. Like asking a job candidate for references. Of course they're going to give you good ones. Smart hiring managers ask those references for other people to talk to. Or they ask specific, factual questions like, how many secretaries has this entrepreneur had? Judge Patrick Schiltz advises law students interviewing at firms not to ask, do you have a life outside work? But rather, how many times last week did you have dinner with your family? What time? Did you work after dinner? A study on selling a used iPod showed the power of phrasing. Asking, what can you tell me about it? Got only 8% disclosure of a known problem. Asking, it doesn't have any problems, does it? Got 61%. But asking, what problems does it have? Prompted 89% of sellers to come clean. Tough questions signal you can't be easily fooled. One caveat. In certain power dynamics, like doctor-patient relationships, open-ended questions work better initially to avoid biasing the answer. Remember Dr. Barber uncovering that dizziness was really grief? Sometimes the confirmation bias isn't about the questions we ask, but what we even notice in the first place. In troubled marriages, partners often start seeing only the negative traits they expect. He's so selfish. Therapist Aaron Beck suggests keeping marriage diaries to consciously track positive actions. One study found 70% of couples improved just by becoming aware of the existing positives. Similarly, leaders like PepsiCo CEO Indra Nooyi advocate assuming positive intent in colleagues' actions. Instead of jumping to negative conclusions like, he's just trying to show off, ask yourself, what's another possibility? This simple shift can diffuse anger and defensiveness. An extreme way to consider the opposite is to run a deliberate mistake. Consultant Paul Showmaker challenged his firm's assumption that responding to RFPs, requests for proposals, was always a waste of time. They deliberately responded to the very next RFP they got and landed over $1 million in business. One woman in another study even ended up marrying a man she agreed to date as a, quote, deliberate mistake after rejecting him multiple times. Third, learn to zoom out and zoom in. Our default setting is what they call the inside view, our own impressions of this specific situation, like, my Thai restaurant will be a huge hit. The outside view ignores those specifics and looks at the larger category. How do restaurants like this usually fare? The outside view relies on base rates, basically statistics about similar situations. For restaurants, maybe 60% fail within 3 years. This feels harsh. We naturally think we're different, but often we're way more typical than we like to believe. Ignoring base rates isn't brave. It's actually egotistical. Even experts get trapped by this. Daniel Kahneman tells a story about his curriculum writing team, which included an expert dean, estimating their project would take 2 years. When asked for the base rate, the dean admitted most similar projects took 7 to 10 years, and 40% never even finished. Their project took 8 years. The lesson: ask experts for base rates. What usually happens? Not predictions about your specific case. What will happen to me? But base rates can feel cold and abstract. That's why we also need to zoom in for a close-up. This adds real texture and intuition. Think about reading TripAdvisor reviews. The average star rating is your outside view, but reading individual reviews gives you the close-up. Maybe that low rating is because of high prices, which you don't actually mind. Franklin Roosevelt mastered this balance. He used polling and mail statistics for the outside view, but also read sample letters himself for the close-up. Xerox CEO Anne Mulcahy made executives serve as customer officer of the day to get a close-up on complaints. Going to the Genba, the real place where action happens, is another close-up technique. Paul Smith at Procter & Gamble stocked competitors, paper towels in the office bathrooms, giving colleagues a visceral close-up that lab data just couldn't provide. Brian Zickman Fisher, facing a life-or-death bone marrow transplant decision, consulted medical study base rates zooming out, and talked to other patients via email lists to understand the actual lived experience, zooming in. Combining the outside view and the close-up gives you the most realistic perspective possible. Finally, the ultimate reality test is often to ooch. Run small experiments before making a big leap. John Hanks at National Instruments didn't commit millions to wireless sensors immediately. He first built a crude brick-in-a-bucket prototype for a demanding UCLA project in the Costa Rican jungle. Why try to predict when you can actually test? Students considering pharmacy school should work in a pharmacy first. Peggy, a perfectionist legal secretary terrified of making errors, ooched by gradually reducing her proofreading passes and even deliberately leaving small errors, discovering the sky didn't actually fall. Ooching aligns with prototyping in design, small tests of change in healthcare, and firing bullets than cannonballs in business. Why don't we do it more? Overconfidence. We think we can predict the future. But research by Philip Tetlock shows experts are terrible predictors, often worse than simple algorithms. Entrepreneurs, interestingly, often avoid prediction altogether and favor testing. As one told researcher Saras Sarasvathy, instead of asking all the questions, I'd try and make some sales. Bill Gross tested the idea for carsdirect.com by putting up a basic website to see if anyone would even try to buy a car online. They sold 3 overnight. Intuit founder Scott Cook now advocates leadership by experiment, citing how a successful service for Indian farmers started as a pilot he initially thought was harebrained. Even parenting can use ooching. Gabe Gabrielson let his son Colin try wearing pajamas to breakfast for 3 days, proving it didn't make him late for school. But ooching has limits. It's bad for situations requiring real commitment. Someone who knows they need a degree shouldn't ooch by taking 1 class a semester. That's just stalling. But someone exploring whether marine biology is right for them absolutely should ooch. Ooching should speed up learning, not delay necessary commitment. And in hiring, maybe the best ooch is a work sample or trial contract, because interviews are notoriously terrible predictors of actual performance. Remember Dan Heath almost rejecting his future star art director Rob Crumb based on a flawed interview impression, saved only by a blind work sample? So to fight confirmation bias, reality test your assumptions. Consider the opposite using techniques like Martin's question, ask disconfirming questions, assume positive intent, run deliberate mistakes, zoom out for base rates, zoom in for a close-up, and ooch whenever you possibly can. Villain 3, short-term emotion. You've widened your options, you've reality tested them. Now it's time to actually choose. But here comes the third villain, short-term emotion. This is that swirl of feelings, fear, excitement, anxiety, greed, lust, that can completely hijack our decisions in the moment, making us choose things we later deeply regret. Think of the fear car buyers feel when approached by a salesman. Salesmen are actually trained to exploit this. Get the customer excited, have them feel the wheel, create false urgency, make them feel obligated, all designed to bypass rational thought. We know the old folk wisdom, sleep on it. That helps because visceral emotion fades over time, but often we need more strategy than just waiting. The third step in RAP is to attain distance before deciding. Andrew Hallam, the millionaire teacher, attained literal physical distance by refusing to visit car lots, doing all his research and negotiation by phone to avoid that emotional pressure. Mostly, though, the distance we need is emotional. A powerful tool for this is the 10th of October 10, developed by Susie Welch. Ask yourself, how will I feel about this decision 10 minutes from now? 10 months from now? 10 years from now? This forces us to give the future real emotional weight, counteracting the overwhelming intensity of the present. Annie was agonizing over whether to tell her boyfriend Carl, "I love you" first. 10 minutes from now? Nervous but proud. 10 months? No regrets, even if it doesn't work out. 10 years? It won't matter much either way. The 10th of October 10 view made it crystal clear she should do it, despite the short-term fear. Use this for work decisions too. Avoiding that tough conversation feels great right now, but how will you feel in 10 months? Offering that hotshot candidate a huge salary feels exciting today, but what about 10 months or 10 years down the line? Short-term emotion isn't always loud, like fear or anger. Sometimes it's really subtle. Consider what's called the mere exposure principle. We develop a preference for things simply because they're familiar. Students liked nonsense words more if they saw them flashed on a blackboard more often, even if they didn't consciously notice them. We even prefer the mirror image of our own face, which we see daily, over our true face, which others see, while our loved ones prefer the opposite. Worryingly, repetition can even make false statements start to feel true. This means we might cling to familiar ideas or processes just because they feel comfortable, not because they're actually better. Combine mere exposure with loss aversion. The fact that losses feel way more painful than equivalent gains feel pleasant. Most people wouldn't take a coin flip where heads wins $100, but tails loses $50, because the pain of losing $50 looms much larger than the pleasure of winning $100. Loss aversion explains why people overpay for warranties and why students who were given a university mug instantly valued it at $7.12, while students who didn't get one would only pay $2.87 for the exact same mug. We get weirdly attached to what we have, almost instantly. Mere exposure plus loss aversion equals a powerful status quo bias. Even innovators fight it. Max Levchin and the PayPal founders initially created groundbreaking security software for Palm Pilots. When users inexplicably started flocking to their crude web demo, especially eBay users, the founders actively resisted. "Go away, we don't want you." Why? The Palm Pilot app was their baby, technologically superior and familiar, mere exposure. Abandoning it felt like a huge loss aversion. Eventually, they saw the light and ditched the Palm Pilot's 12,000 users for the web's over 1 million users, what they called an emotional but completely obvious business decision. If even a choice that clear felt that hard, imagine how these forces affect our ambiguous decisions. How do we get distance from these subtle biases? Try looking from an observer's perspective. Andy Grove broke Intel's paralysis over the memory chip business by asking, "What would our successors do?" That bit of imaginary distance instantly clarified the need to exit memory chips. Research shows this works because distance helps us focus on the most important factors. When choosing between a prestigious but grueling job, Job A, and a fulfilling but less lucrative one, Job B, students were more likely to recommend Job B to their best friend, 83%, than choose it for themselves, only 66%. Why? When advising others, we see the forest, long-term happiness. When deciding for ourselves, we get lost in the trees, dad's expectations, peer comparisons. Our advice to others also naturally downplays short-term fears. Guys will advise friends to call the girl they like, even if they'd hesitate themselves. So perhaps the single most powerful question for gaining distance is simply, what would I tell my best friend to do in this situation? Try it next time you're stuck. The clarity can be genuinely surprising. So to fight short-term emotion, attain distance. Use the 10th of October 10 to balance present and future feelings. Recognize the sneaky pull of mere exposure and loss aversion toward the status quo, and gain real clarity by asking what your successor or your best friend would do. Villain 4. Overconfidence. You've widened your options, reality tested them, and attained distance. You've made your choice. But wait, there's one more villain lurking in the shadows. Overconfidence. About how the future will actually unfold. Remember Decca Records, turning down the Beatles? Groups are out. Four-piece groups with guitars particularly are finished. Or the medical experts who proclaimed themselves completely certain about diagnoses but were dead wrong 40% of the time. We think we know way more than we actually do. We shine our spotlight on the information close at hand and draw confident conclusions, completely forgetting about the vast darkness of the unknown future. Whoops, the internet happened. The future isn't a single point we can accurately predict, it's a range of possibilities. Fighting overconfidence means actually preparing for that range. This is the final step of RAP, prepare to be wrong. One powerful technique is bookending the future. Instead of guessing a single outcome, estimate the lower bookend, a pessimistic scenario, and the upper bookend, an optimistic one. Investor Byron Penstock used this to evaluate Coinstar, owner of Redbox, when major studios cut off its DVD supply. His lower bookend, selling off Redbox for parts, suggested a $21 stock price. His upper bookend, Redbox thrives anyway, suggested $62. When the actual price dipped near 28, he saw huge potential upside and pretty limited downside, so he invested heavily. As the price rose toward 46, nearing the middle, he sold, locking in a 75% return. He actively seeks situations where current reality is skewed toward the lower bookend. Research confirms that explicitly considering the high and low ends makes our estimates of ranges way more accurate. We tap into different knowledge when thinking about extremes. For life decisions, bookending isn't just about placing smart bets, it's about real preparation. How do you prepare for the lower bookend? Think insurance, solid contingency plans. For the upper bookend, think scalability, handling unexpected wild success. To generate these bookends, use what they call prospective hindsight. Instead of asking, what might happen? Assume an outcome has already happened, and work backward. Ask, it's a year from now, and this project was a total fiasco. What went wrong? This is Gary Klein's premortem. It surfaces potential failures way more effectively than just sitting around speculating. The 100,000 Homes campaign used a similar analysis and identified a potential legal snag regarding fair housing laws. By addressing it proactively with a legal expert, they eliminated what could have been a major threat. The flip side is the preparate. It's a year from now, and we're absolute heroes. How do we make sure we're ready for this success? Minnetonka anticipated soft soap could be a genuine blockbuster. Realizing the plastic pump supply was super limited, they preemptively bought options for the entire world's supply, locking out competitors for several crucial years. What about preparing for things you genuinely can't foresee? Use a safety factor. Engineers calculate the load a ladder needs to hold, say 400 pounds, and then multiply by a safety factor, say 6, building it to withstand 2,400 pounds. Elevator cables might have a safety factor of 11. Software projects add serious buffer time, like 30 to 50% to their schedules. It's a crude but really effective acknowledgement of our inherent overconfidence. Simply anticipating problems, even if you can't prevent them, actually helps us cope better. The realistic job preview shows this clearly. Call centers that explicitly warn applicants up front about angry customers, low pay, and genuinely tough conditions actually reduce turnover significantly. Why? It's not just that the wrong people drop out early. It acts like a psychological vaccine. Exposing people to a small dose of reality prepares them, so when they encounter the negative aspects, they aren't shocked or deeply disillusioned. Realistic job previews increase job satisfaction, even when given after hiring. You can use this idea yourself. Get a realistic preview for a product launch or even college life. Mental simulation, used in therapy, works similarly. Sandra, super nervous about asking for a raise, scripted and rehearsed the entire conversation, anticipating potential negative responses, and planning her countermoves. This preparation really helped her succeed. Finally, we need tripwires, clear signals that snap us awake from autopilot and force us to genuinely reconsider a decision. We drift along through life, often completely forgetting we actually have a choice. Like the woman who dreams of visiting Italy but keeps postponing until it's suddenly too late. When did she actively choose not to go? Tripwires prevent this slow drift. Van Halen's infamous brown M&Ms were actually a tripwire for quality control. Zappos' $1,000 quit offer is a tripwire forcing new hires to consciously commit. Kodak desperately needed tripwires based on digital adoption rates, like, "We will definitely act when digital satisfaction hits 10%, to break their deadly inertia." Deadlines are super common tripwires. Even totally artificial ones work surprisingly well. Students were way more likely to complete a survey for $5 with a deadline than without one. Research grant submissions actually dropped when deadlines were removed. Deadlines force our attention. Partitions act as tripwires too, breaking up consumption into chunks. Eating cookies one by one from foil wrappers takes way longer than mindlessly grabbing from an open box. Gamblers bet significantly less with money divided into separate envelopes. Venture capitalists often release funds in multiple rounds, partitioning the investment to force regular reassessment. Partitions combat what's called escalating commitment, throwing good money after bad because I've already put so much in. Set clear budget or time limits for uncertain ventures, like maybe your spouse's ambitious topiary business idea. Tripwires aren't just cautious. They actually enable risk-taking by capping the downside and quieting your anxious mind until the trigger gets hit. Some tripwires are based on pattern recognition. Lucille Packard Children's Hospital implemented rapid response teams. The key tripwire wasn't just objective vital signs, but the nurse's gut feeling. Call the team if you are worried about a patient. This legitimized real intuition and caught problems way earlier, drastically reducing code calls and mortality rates. Similarly, Peter Drucker urged businesses to actively watch for unexpected success, like the accidental discoveries leading to Rogaine from a blood pressure drug side effect and Viagra from a failed angina drug trial. Labeling a specific pattern, like lemurs for pilots feeling something's just wrong, makes it easier to spot and actually act on. A tripwire gives us that incredibly precious realization: I actually have a choice to make right now. So to fight overconfidence, prepare to be wrong, bookend the future realistically, run premortems and preparades, use safety factors generously, get realistic previews, simulate mentally, and set clear tripwires based on dates, budgets, partitions, or recognizable patterns. Trusting the process. That's the complete WRAP framework. Widen your options, reality test your assumptions, attain distance before deciding, and prepare to be wrong. It's a process specifically designed to counteract the four villains constantly plaguing our decisions. But making a decision, especially in a group, isn't only about getting the right answer, it's also about fairness. People genuinely need to feel the process was just, even if they end up disagreeing with the outcome. This is what's called procedural justice. Research on court cases shows that losers who felt the process was genuinely fair, they were heard, the judge used accurate information, explained the ruling clearly, were almost as satisfied as winners who felt the process was totally unfair. Using the WRAP steps openly contributes to this sense of fairness. So does actively involving people through bargaining or honest compromise. It might seem slower initially, but researcher Nutt found that while bargaining took slightly longer up front, it dramatically improved decision success and really sped up implementation because people actually bought in. To show people you're genuinely listening and considering their views, try stating their position back to them even better than they did themselves, like mediator Robert Mnookin does. Or defend your own decision by honestly acknowledging its real flaws, like NetApp founder Dave Hitz. This builds deep trust in the process itself, not just the individual decision. Matt DiRigo's story with his nonprofit Arts perfectly embodies trusting the process. Born from personal tragedy, losing his mother to cancer while his sister battled lymphoma, his passion was using art therapy to help kids facing serious adversity, just as painting had helped him cope during those dark times. After 10 solid years of building art successfully in San Diego, he felt genuinely stuck, torn between deepening local roots and pursuing a much bigger national vision. Instead of framing it as stay or leave, a mentor helped him widen options. Why can't you actually do both? He reality tested by talking honestly to peers and board members, and ooched with a local partnership called La Maestra to test his expansion model. He attained distance when someone asked how he'd feel in 10 years if arts remained only local, realizing his core priorities absolutely demanded growth. He prepared to be wrong by directly addressing board concerns, hiring the right staff, setting a clear deadline tripwire. His passion fueled the entire journey, but a genuinely thoughtful process guided his specific choices. Ultimately, a good process provides real confidence. Not the dangerous overconfidence of ignoring real risks, but the quiet, steady confidence that you've actually done the work, considered the different angles, and made the absolute best choice you could. It quiets that nagging, "What am I missing?" anxiety. And paradoxically, trusting a solid process can actually make you bolder. Like a safety harness for a climber, it gives you the real freedom to explore risky terrain. And often, genuine boldness is what's needed. Studies of elderly people find regrets usually center not on actions they took, but on chances they never took, on hesitation and painful indecisiveness. Being decisive isn't some inherited trait. It's a way of behaving, enabled by a process you can genuinely trust. The RAP process won't guarantee perfect outcomes every time. Luck still plays its role, but it can definitely steer us toward better, wiser choices. And the right choice, made at the right time, can truly make all the difference. Isn't it fascinating and maybe a little unsettling to realize just how much our choices are shaped by these invisible mental quirks? The spotlight that completely blinds us, the biases that quietly pull us off course, the emotions that cloud our judgment. We all face this stuff every single day, whether we're deciding on a career path, navigating a tricky relationship, or honestly just figuring out what to have for lunch. The Heath brothers, in Decisive, don't just diagnose the problem and leave us hanging. They offer a real cure, or at least a genuinely powerful treatment. What I find most compelling about the RAP framework is its pure practicality. It's not some abstract theory collecting dust on a shelf. It's an actual toolkit. Widen, reality test, attain distance, prepare. 4 straightforward steps that act like guardrails, keeping us from veering into those common decision traps we all know too well. It acknowledges that our brains aren't perfect instruments, but it reassures us that we don't have to be passive victims of our built-in biases. We can actively fight back. Think about the real power unlocked by just one of these techniques. How many times have you felt completely stuck between option A and option B, only to realize, maybe much later, that option C was just sitting there waiting outside your narrow awareness? That's the genuine magic of deliberately widening your options. Or consider the simple act of asking yourself, what would I tell my best friend to do? How often does that instantly cut through all the fog of your own short-term worries and reveal the path that's actually aligned with your deeper values? That's attaining distance in real action. The real beauty here is that you don't need hours of agonizing deliberation for every single choice. Even a super quick mental check can make a genuine difference. Facing a quick decision right now? Just ask yourself, am I falling into narrow framing without realizing it? Is there one more option I should honestly consider? Am I rushing because of emotion? Can I take 10 minutes, or honestly even 10 seconds, to quickly apply the 10th of October 10 rule? Am I being overconfident? What's one realistic thing that could go wrong, and how can I actually prepare for it? If there's one simple action you could take away today, maybe it's this. The very next time you face a choice that feels like option A or nothing, actively force yourself to find an option B and an option C. Just generating those alternatives, even if you ultimately stick with A, genuinely changes the way you think about the whole decision. Or try this. The next time you feel that familiar knot of anxiety about a choice, step outside yourself mentally and ask what advice you'd honestly give to someone you really care about in the exact same situation. That simple shift in perspective can be incredibly clarifying. Ultimately, Decisive really empowers us. It tells us that making better choices isn't about having superhuman intuition or somehow finding a crystal ball. It's about having a reliable, trustworthy process. Trusting that process allows us to be way more confident, not because we're magically certain of the outcome, but because we're genuinely certain we've made the choice thoughtfully and deliberately. It frees us from endless agonizing and allows us to act with much greater clarity and real courage. That was our exploration of Decisive by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. We've touched upon the core ideas today, the villains that constantly trip us up, and the RAP process that helps us stand firm. But honestly, a summary like this is really just scratching the surface. The real insights often come from the stories, the nuances, the way the authors connect these powerful ideas to real lives and real dilemmas. This summary aims to give you a strong sense of whether this book's approach genuinely resonates with you. If you felt a spark of recognition in these ideas, if you found yourself nodding along thinking, yes, that's exactly what happens to me, then I truly encourage you to pick up a copy of Decisive. Reading it isn't just about learning clever techniques, it's about fundamentally upgrading the operating system you use to navigate life's most important moments. You can find a link to the book in the description below. And if this journey through Decisive brought you some real value today, do give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing to Billionaire's Bookshelf. We dive into transformative books like this regularly, aiming to extract the wisdom that can genuinely help us all build better lives and make better choices. Join us next time as we continue exploring the ideas that shape real success. Let's keep learning and growing together.